Reboots in video games is a controversial topic in itself, because some reboots are kinda good, some are kinda bad, but most frequently we eventually find out that they are redundant, because nobody asked for them and correspondingly nobody enjoyed them. But there is an obvious difference between the reboots of Doom and Wolfenstein, DMC and Prey, and Saints Row, the latest and currently last title in one of the bigger action-adventure franchises. Volition Studio has built a reputation of providing fun, engaging and most importantly, unique video games in this genre, making it compete with Grand Theft Auto on almost even footing. However, eventually Saints Row 2022 was given away for free by Epic Games Store, meaning there was little to no difference between someone downloading it for free or not buying for full price anyway. So we have the same question we did with Immortals of Avium and Redfall. Why did Saints Row fail? Especially when the previous games in the series did not, at least to some extent. The first sign of failing franchise happened after 4 consequent games in the series and with the corresponding development of Agents of Mayhem in 2017. While being not the worst game ever, it was indeed not what people expected from the studio, providing previous Saints Row games. To be fully transparent, I have only tried the beginning levels of Saints Row 4, and let me just show you the difference between both. Imagine that after Gears of War games you get a bland looter shooter with open world grindfest mechanics. It's obviously not the end of the world, but not what you'd expect if you called such game a spin-off of a series with a solid cult following. Volition have listened to the feedback, have taken their time developing the next Saints Row game, and to their courtesy, they warned everyone that the game is going to be a reboot, restart and a complete reimagining of the series, giving it a new and fresh beginning. With Saints Row 4, the tone of the game has become overly absurd, overly surreal and overly comical to an extent that Volition have decided to bring back a bit more serious tone to the game, instead of hyperbolizing everything happening in the game for the sake of humor and absurdity. Jim Boone, the creative director of Saints Row, has directly stated that we love the old Saints Row games, but we also recognize those games are out of time. They made sense within that era, and we were able to do things that felt good back then. But that tone is not something that we feel like we want to do today. That's basically the source of a lot of commenters, stating that the game went too woke, for the sake of appealing to the youngest and most progressive audiences, not the best foundation for the video game success. Additionally to the Epic Games' initial exclusivity, the approach of forcing the players to forget what they saw in the previous games for the sake of the current one is kinda self-explanatory. Volition has taken the name of the franchise, has thrown out all the characters previously existing in it, has forgotten all the events from the previous games, and instead have added a new story, new characters, and expects both the former and new players to treat the game as somehow comparable to the previous games in the franchise. What could possibly go wrong? It's like Converse would decide to throw its canonic Chuck Taylor design and materials, instead doing flip-flops from cheap rubber but retaining the famous star-shaped label, and the sales department would wonder why nobody buys them. But I digress. We may remember the case of The Last of Us Part 2, when the creative director has subverted all our expectations and has decided to stop the recycle of violence. The story and the approach towards it is so cringe-inducing. I cannot watch the cutscenes without laughter, but truth be told, all the other aspects of the game, from functional and visual to gameplay related, were more than solid. That's basically why Part 2 had an extremely scandalous launch, but the sales were on such a level that it bolstered the creation of a full-blown TV show. In other words, even with such drastic decisions, the game could succeed in the long-term perspective, and the franchise could eventually become even bigger than before. Saints Row trailer has shown us that this would not be the case for this game. All the scenes, frames, events, characters' actions and reactions all were suggesting that Volition is going to offer us Fortnite 2 with explicit violence and R-rated content. And I know that Fortnite everyone's play right now does not necessarily have a story, while Saints Row 2022 does not even have a fraction of what makes Fortnite appealing to casual and even hardcore audiences. First and foremost, the designs of both the characters and the enemies are simply not interesting to look at. While the approach of creating your own character remains from the previous game titles, and the customizer really allows you to create whoever or whatever you want to, including genital customizer and voice changing depending on your choice, the rest of the designs leaves a lot to be desired. I appreciate how the main character is voiced and played and really allows the player to be the best fantasy version of themselves. Too bad that the accompanying characters highly resemble the ones from Redfall, which is a cliché, and a cliché. They have different genders, sexual preferences and races for the sake of them having it. What is most confusing, we never get any clue regarding their commonalities and how such different people not only meet together, but started living under one roof. We get Eli, a business-type character who doesn't resort to violence and instead serves as the brain for all the business operations of our gang. This is being shown by his hipster looks, glasses and overly geeky language. In other words, a character that visually comes as a blender mixture of all Big Bang Theory characters. We get Kevin, a cook and a DJ for one of the local gangs, the Idols, which is being shown by his metrosexual looks, and his non-willingness to wear any shirt is supposed to hint to his pansexuality. We get Nina, a car mechanic working for another local gang, Los Panteras, but surprisingly she doesn't wear any gang colors and looks just like a nerdy Mexican girl who likes cars and binge-watching Netflix. In other words, all the characters' design lack both the realism and relatability to the protagonist, while being not quirky enough to be perceived as over-the-top, idiotic psychopaths, as the story tries to picture them to be. The designs of the enemies are a bit better, they have distinct colors and choice of clothes, even their vehicles are original and actually demonstrate some uniqueness in this otherwise bland and non-interesting city that was supposed to be inspired by Las Vegas, but in reality we see just an array of empty streets, the deserts around them, and some levels in between. But even these designs are not enough to provide any visual variety to the open world, as they are recyclable and repeatable over and over from level to level. It seems that the game has been overall developed using one of the later versions of Unreal Engine. That explains why all the movement, all the textures and even colors heavily resemble Fortnite, with its cartoonish looks and correspondingly teenage-like feel. And truth be told, some natural scenes where you just stumble upon a picture of a sunset or some street where the NPCs are making more than 2 of the same actions every second look actually impressive. The same concerns a number of staged levels, from the nightmarish Arena Island that heavily reminds of similar environment from Manhunt, to the train we're supposed to rob at some point in the game. But the moments of visual appreciation are so rare that it is very easy to disregard the game as a private server of Fortnite or its cheaper made modification, which, by the way, still works not the best. The bugs and technical problems of Saints Row at launch were more than expected, as unfortunately the game companies expect to launch their projects undercooked and underpolished and fix everything during its lifespan. Apparently, the lifespan of Saints Row was not sufficient to fix the technical problems I faced. The vehicle physics is all over the place. Sometimes they drive too fast, sometimes they do not turn, sometimes they turn on their own, and sometimes they decide to jump for whatever reason. Taking into account that driving in Saints Row is at least a decent quarter of the gameplay, it becomes pretty obvious why you may want to avoid any driving, especially when the sound of the driving is literally the worst I've seen and heard so far. Certainly, sound does not make a video game, but if your game is based on driving and shooting, you cannot mess up sound effects that much. Despite the options having an array of sliders for sound levels, you will not get the sound of driving anywhere close to distinct level unless you completely turn off everything else. And it's not like it's an expensive solution for this problem, because it can be done with the most basic form of side chain compression even the student in audio engineering can do. So if you are just like me and prefer just driving around the virtual cities for the sake of driving, you'd have more pleasure doing so in GTA 5, in Cyberpunk, even in Watch Dogs, or even in older titles, because without proper sound support you do not get any impression and feel of driving. Instead, you just watch a floaty car transferring itself across the virtual road. But the radio stations are more than fine, and I'm especially grateful for inclusion of Nuclear Blast Station, which is a rare occasion of extreme heavy metal appearing in AAA game. With proper driving sound support, it would be a lot better. The UI is fine, the weapon design is mid but okay, the design of various clothing items for our characters is also quite fine, but they very frequently collide with other game objects, which is also not that great, but fine. We have already mentioned the driving as a solid part of Saints Row gameplay and how it's messed up by the lack of proper sound support. Driving becomes a boring chore pretty fast, because you'll be driving a lot and driving through kinda empty streets of our virtual city before you unlock any possibility for fast traveling, which I personally failed to do, even after doing a third of story missions. We could only travel back to our main base of operations, and that's it. I guess you could travel faster if you called the taxi from your mobile app, but it's not the best solution here. It somehow worked in GTA 4, and even there, it was just engaging and entertaining sitting inside the car, listening to drivers' complaints and the talking nonsense of local radio. The shooting behind Saints Row is decent, not going to lie. The weapons feel just like a bit weaker versions of the same in Fortnite, but they're properly animated, properly sounded to provide enough feedback and response for you to keep on shooting the enemies, or not them, but their health lines. The combat itself just works to keep you spending time in it. During the respective missions, you appear in an area, you shoot the enemy's health bars, and they try their best not to miss you, because their accuracy leaves a lot to be desired on the normal level of difficulty. What is worse, they spawn behind you and hit you rather hard, and the only thing you can do to prevent that from happening is watching the radar and rolling out of their way. No other visual or audio cue, which is kinda bad. To replenish your own health, you have to perform special moves that unlock once you kill enough enemies, and this special move is always either too violent or too silly, making both the animations disjointed from the overall tone of the story, which we'll discuss further. Weapons have their unlockable skills when you shoot enough enemies, and these skills, just like your own unlockable perks, make little to no difference during combat. You just want to shoot and shoot as quickly as possible while fighting the aim assist. Speaking of which, it's also not good. It shows not the enemy your crosshair is closer to, but the enemy that is closer to you. In other words, it's not based on your relative aiming, but instead on enemy's proximity towards you, and that makes aim assist an additional challenge that you have to overcome or turn it off completely. What is even sillier, the enemies are scripted to appear depending on the mission. For example, one mission included a car chase, where the enemies would keep on chasing and shooting me on my way to saving one of my companions. I decided to do what normal people do and shoot the chasers first to drive safer, but when I stopped and started blasting, enemies kept coming endlessly, so I gave up, drove to the destination point, and all the enemies behind me just disappeared. Very much fun action, thank you Saints Row. With every mission, you get some experience, and experience unlocks perks to help you during battle. These vary from special moves to passive upgrades. The ideas behind them are kinda admirable, but taking into account that enemy AI does not become better and smarter over time, and instead the enemies just become fatter with chunkier HP bars, you kinda do not need both the active and passive skills. So game just balances combat in the most primitive way without even showing the numbers of damage you're dealing and the enemy levels for you to understand how difficult they are to fight. The final part of gameplay is the story, and as usual, if you are afraid of any spoilers, you can skip this section to the summary, but I assure you that there is not much to spoil. Overall, the story of Saints Row is just plain boring. The premise is that a group of marginal, idiotic psychopaths decide to create their own street gang with the long-term goal of becoming the power to reckon with. Apparently, similar to previous games, they want to eventually become the presidents of the USA by doing enough heroic deeds. But the problem of this premise is not only its lack of originality and relatability to the current audiences, choices. The major problem is the characters and their actions. The game starts with our characters serving the Marshall private military company that is so wealthy and powerful that it replaced the local police and law enforcement forces. We start with a small operation that eventually escalates to the interception of one of the biggest terrorists of this game world, the Nawali. We intercept him, but our leader is not satisfied with our actions because we caused too much destruction. Despite that, we get an invitation from the Marshall's director to provide security for an exhibition opening, which features one of the greatest artifacts of mankind. Obviously, we fail, and it gets stolen. We get fired, and eventually we start looking for various street gigs that include violence and conflict with other local bands, the Panteras and the Idols. We piss them off really quickly, so they strike back and the recycle of violence goes on until our idiots decide to make their own street gang called the Saints, and as the first major gig and the source of funding, they decide to rob the train with cash, which they do, and after that level of mediocrity, I just stopped wasting my time on it. You may say that the GTA stories also include simple pleasures of doing various crimes in virtual world, and the story in general is not that deep, insightful, intriguing and thrilling, but it is the characters that we remember from these games, from CJ in San Andreas to Arthur Morgan in Red Dead 2. It's their actions and their characteristics that makes us want to be part of their respective worlds and stories, regardless of how simple they may seem. Here's what the characters of Saints Row are like. Once they decide they want to be a gang of their own, they decide to raid the abandoned church near the desert. The church belongs to a building company, so they just torture the company's owner by driving with bad sound and controls until he gives them all the documents for the church. Here's what they do at the beginning of the game to get some money. They just simply rob the local store owner because they want to. And it's not like they're charming psychopaths like Trevor from GTA 5 or even calm and stoic Aiden Pierce from Watch Dogs, who either do the same things in an artistically entertaining way or they are forced to do this. Here, all four characters of Saints Row are straight douchebags that have almost no redeeming qualities. And let's remind that the dev team was going to deliver the game according to the requirements of modern time and culture. They are so out of touch and so willing to steal, harm, lie and break all the possible laws to get the money and power that they are straight villains. But villains with no brain, no charm, no drama and no relatability. I'm sorry for repeating myself. The story of Saints Row is neither any form of serious criminal drama about the street hustle and coming to the top of the criminal world, nor an absurdist B-movie comedy full of parodies, references, gotcha moments and cringe content so extreme that it makes you want to laugh. If you want the first, you can play something like Watch Dogs 2, a game about a group of hacktivists fighting against the corporations and doing some collateral damage to the public, by the way, with far better character design visually and narrative-wise. If you want the second, play No More Heroes, as despite its outdated graphical style and a lot of lawn moving, you get a really unique experience with a story so bad that it becomes the best for that occasion. Saints Row was not necessarily the case of failing development team, as with the Volition's owners going bankrupt, they were more than capable of doing Saints Row 4 and satisfy the players. While some may say that the change of owner resulted in Volition going rogue, I still believe that the game itself could not be fixed, even if left the city itself, the shooting mechanic and certain levels like the Manhunt Island or the train mission. It needs complete overhaul and redoing of driving and sound design. It needs to remove the enemy HP bars and make the action more dynamic and challenging with better AI and better weapon choices. And even if we retain the cringe-inducing story, we could actually fix a lot, like receiving unskippable phone calls before and after the mission. It's far too much work, making it a reboot of a reboot. The moral of the story is, don't try to reinvent the wheel as a triangle, and do not put a brand name on something that completely contradicts it.